This is Land of Havilah, 2 Chronicles 33. Hezekiah reigned 29 years, died at the age of 54, and his son Manasseh reigned in his place. Verse 1. Manasseh was 12 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. He did that which was evil in Yahweh's sight, after the abominations of the nations whom Yahweh cast out before the children of Israel. For he built again the high places which Hezekiah his father had broken down, and he raised up altars for the Baals, made Asheroth, and worshipped all the army of the sky, and served them. He built altars in Yahweh's house, of which Yahweh said, My name shall be in Jerusalem forever. He built altars for all the army of the sky in the two courts of Yahweh's house. He also made his children to pass through the fire in the valley of the son of Hinnom. He practiced sorcery, divination, and witchcraft, and dealt with those who had familiar spirits and with wizards. He did much evil in Yahweh's sight to provoke him to anger. He set the engraved image of the idol which he had made in God's house, of which God had said to David and to Solomon his son, In this house and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, I will put my name forever. I will not any more remove the foot of Israel from off the land which I have appointed for your fathers, if only they will observe to do all that I have commanded them, even all the law, the statutes, and the ordinances given by Moses. Manasseh seduced Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that they did more evil than did the nations whom Yahweh destroyed before the children of Israel. Comment in verse 1, Manasseh took the throne at the age of 12. We would think his 54-year-old father would have had older sons, but maybe not. We remember from the last chapter that when his father was 39 and terminally ill, Yahweh gave him a 15-year extension on his life. He fathered Manasseh during that extension. In verse 1, Manasseh reigned 55 years, which would put him at 67 at the time of his death. The ministry of Isaiah the prophet spanned the four previous kings, Isaiah 1:1. In Hebrews 11:37, there's a reference to an Old Testament prophet being sawn apart. By Jewish legend, this was Isaiah by order of Manasseh. 2 Kings 21:16 assures us that Manasseh was capable of it, quote, Moreover, Manasseh shed innocent blood very much until he had filled Jerusalem from one end to the other, end quote. In verses 2 and 9, Manasseh's and Judah's abominations were worse than the Canaanites. The question being, how does Yahweh feel now that he's expelled the Canaanites and given the land to the Israelites? In verses 3 through 7, Manasseh did it all. He desecrated Yahweh's temple with altars to foreign gods, filled Yahweh's two courts with idols to all the army of the sky, meaning idols to the sun, moon, stars, etc. He put an engraved image in the temple, involved himself with every occultic practice there was, sacrificed his children by fire to a foreign god in the valley of Hinnom, which was on the southwest side of Jerusalem. And in all these abominations he led Judah to do the same. Verse 6 mentions familiar spirits. The term appears 13 times in the Old Testament. It seems that an occultic practitioner might be familiar with a spirit. For example, let's say that a demonic spirit makes himself known to an occultic practitioner, and the spirit calls himself Bob, to pick a random name. Bob and the practitioner would then be familiar with each other. Thus, Bob is a familiar spirit because the practitioner is familiar with him and has an ongoing relationship with him. From the New Testament point of view, we'd say the practitioner had a demon who was supposedly friendly with him. Since there's a familiar relationship, the practitioner might call on Bob to perform favors, such as to provide information, 1 Chronicles 10:13, or Bob might be able to summon the spirit of a dead person or cause the appearance of an imitation of a dead person, 1 Samuel 28:8. Of course, Bob wouldn't be the type of spirit we would want to cozy up with because he's no friend. He's deceptive, and his end game is to steal, kill, and destroy, John 10:10. But back to the text in verses 7 and 8, as a reminder of Yahweh's warning, he said he would put his name on the temple and plant Israel firmly in the promised land only as long as they obeyed the law of Moses, 1 Kings 9:3-7. Verse 10, Yahweh spoke to Manasseh and to his people, but they didn't listen. Comment, Yahweh spoke to them. 2 Kings gives details that Yahweh spoke to them through prophets during Manasseh's reign, and after no response, he finally said to them, quote, "Behold, I'm bringing such calamity on Jerusalem and Judah that whoever hears of it, both ears will tingle," 2 Kings 21:12. Coming up, Babylon is about 900 miles to the east and was at this time subject to the Assyrian Empire. And a mind-blowing fact that we didn't learn in 2 Kings, during Manasseh's reign, the Assyrians barged their way into Jerusalem, arrested Manasseh, carried him 900 miles to Babylon, imprisoned him there, but later released him and returned him to Jerusalem. In Yahweh's mercy, this was Manasseh's forewarning and foreshadowing of the Babylonian captivity. Verse 11, "Therefore Yahweh brought on them the captains of the army of the king of Assyria, who took Manasseh in chains, bound him with fetters, and carried him to Babylon. When he was in distress, he begged Yahweh his God and humbled himself greatly before the God of his fathers. He prayed to him, and he was entreated by him, and heard his supplication, and brought him again to Jerusalem and to his kingdom. Then Manasseh knew that Yahweh was God." Comment: It seems Yahweh wanted to teach Manasseh that the unimaginable was possible. It would be hard to imagine how hard things can get unless a person's been there. Manasseh was raised in royal privilege, but he learned about losing that privilege. But he prayed, and the unimaginable happened a second time, that the Assyrians returned him to Jerusalem. In verse 13, quote, "Then Manasseh knew that Yahweh was God," end quote. Coming up after learning that lesson, he actually had a little success. Verse 14, "Now after this he built an outer wall to David's city, on the west side of Gihon in the valley, even to the entrance at the fish gate. He encircled Ophel with it, and raised it up to a very great height, and he put valiant captains in all the fortified cities of Judah." Comment: He improved the defenses of Jerusalem and Judah. He built a second wall around part of Jerusalem to encompass more area. In verse 14, with the mention of Gihon, Ophel, and the fish gate, it's apparent that the new wall stretched across the east and north sides of the city. He, quote, "raised it up to a very great height," end quote. He doesn't want to be taken captive again. Furthermore, now that he knew Yahweh was God, verse 15, he took away the foreign gods and the idol out of Yahweh's house, and all the altars that he had built on the mountain of Yahweh's house and in Jerusalem, and cast them out of the city. Comment: The mountain of Yahweh's house is the Temple Mount. He removed all the idolatry from the Temple Mount, and from the rest of Jerusalem, and coming up he ordered it to be removed from the rest of Judah. Instead of idolatry, he repaired the bronze altar at the temple and offered to Yahweh. Verse 16, "He built up Yahweh's altar and offered sacrifices of peace offerings and of thanksgiving on it, and commanded Judah to serve Yahweh, the God of Israel. Nevertheless, the people sacrificed still in the high places, but only to Yahweh their God." Comment: His life course was somewhat opposite Solomon's. He started poorly but ended well. 2 Kings makes no mention of his turnaround. Verse 18, "Now the rest of the acts of Manasseh, and his prayer to his God, and the words of the seers who spoke to him in the name of Yahweh, the God of Israel, behold, they are written among the acts of the kings of Israel." Comment regarding the appeal he made to Yahweh in Babylon, verse 19. His prayer also, and how God was entreated of him, and all his sin and his trespass, and the places in which he built high places, and set up the Asherah poles and the engraved images, before he humbled himself, behold, they're written in the history of Hosea. Comment: The history of Hosea is a lost work. Hosea means seers. It can be translated history of the seers, or as a proper name, the history of Hosea. Verse 20, "So Manasseh slept with his fathers, and they buried him in his own house, and Amon his son reigned in his place." Comment: They buried Manasseh in a garden at the palace called the Garden of Uzzah, 2 Kings 21:18. Doing the math from verse 1, he was 67 years old. Amon his son reigned, but not for long. Verse 21. Amon was 22 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 2 years in Jerusalem. He did that which was evil in Yahweh's sight, as did Manasseh his father, and Amon sacrificed to all the engraved images which Manasseh his father had made, and served them. He didn't humble himself before Yahweh as Manasseh his father had humbled himself, But this same Ammon trespassed more and more. His servants conspired against him and put him to death in his own house. But the people of the land killed all those who had conspired against Ammon, and the people of the land made Josiah, his son, king in his place. Comment in verse 24, some conspirators assassinated Ammon in the palace. For the third time in Judah, domestic conspirators have assassinated the king. In verse 25, the people of the land still favored the house of David. Quote, the people of the land killed all those who had conspired against King Ammon and made Josiah his son king. 2 Chronicles 34 is next.